Hello, everybody. I am here today with Nathaniel from the channel Council of Geeks, who is here to talk about their new novel, which just came out, which I am so excited to talk about today. So, first of all, a lot of you who watch me probably have also watched Council of Geeks because I don't know. I feel like there's crossover for some reason. Whenever you appear in one of my live stream chats, people are like, "Oh my god, Council of Geeks! I love their videos so much." But you run a really cool. This is why I'm excited for us to talk about our books, because you run a really cool YouTube channel which delves a lot into nerd culture and fandom culture especially from an LGBTQ community angle. So I guess to start off, before we get into the book, do you want to tell us a little bit about your channel?
Yeah, so Council of Geeks is something I've been doing for closer to a decade than I would care to admit. It's evolved a lot over the years, but it has settled into a rhythm of me just talking about nerdy stuff, sometimes specific movies or shows. I talk about Doctor Who a lot. But I'm also really fond of talking about patterns that I see, whether they be storytelling patterns and tropes, or whether they be patterns in the representation of LGBTQ plus people. For anyone who doesn't know me, I am gender fluid. I use she, they pronouns. Either one is fine. And I do answer to either Nathaniel or Vera. So that's gender fluidity for you. So, as a part of that community, I care about the way that representation ends up being done well or poorly, as it continues to become a bit more prevalent, and to look at the patterns that have existed up to this point, what ones are helpful, what ones should probably be broken, and things of that nature. But it's even when I talk about that stuff, it's pretty much always filtered through geeky examples. So even if I'm talking broadly about just queer representation, I'm going to cite things like Doctor Who and Star Trek and Star Wars and things like that, because that's what I know.
I always love that, and I always love when I see a new video of yours come out. I'm always excited to watch because I feel like the videos always take like such a researched and not, I don't know if balanced is the right word, just a very in-depth look at everything. It's never feels very surface level. It always feels like we're looking at a lot of angles to an issue, or really talking about different interpretations of something, and I just feel like it's really, really analytical. I like it a lot.
Well, thank you so much. I do my best on that. And I'll actually be the first to say up front, I'm actually not great at research. I'm not horrible at it, but it's not my strong suit. What I think I'm fairly decent at is understanding what the counter arguments to what I'm saying will be, and not necessarily dunking on those, but building my own case for the point I'm trying to make to address what I'm fairly certain the other arguments against what I'm saying are going to be. So that's just kind of one of the things my brain does, is it pulls something apart and goes, okay, where are the weaknesses in this? And that was one of the reasons I was never fun to have in a meeting back when I had a normal 9 to 5 job, because they do a presentation on something and I would have to sit there and shut up because my brain is immediately going, that's a bad idea. Here's what could go wrong there. That might work, but it's going to depend on all these things not going wrong. And one of them probably will. And when I apply that to my own work, it helps me address things that I think are easy to gloss over when you're just focused on putting your own thought forward.
I've always felt that skill is so beneficial to have on YouTube, but I've always wondered if it's detrimental to quick growth on YouTube, but it's helpful for finding a core audience of people that really like you and become really trusting of your opinions. But it's hard to get a lot of people really quick, because I've noticed that too. I get a lot of people in my comments who will say things like, wow, I didn't expect you to address the opposition so well, or you took such a balanced take to this. And it gets a lot of people feeling like they can trust my analysis, but it also, if I'm not screaming at someone, or I think the big reactions and the big extreme opinions tend to grow faster and get a bigger viewer base. So it's good for slow growth, I think. Yeah.
The more declarative and hardline you can be on something, the more the algorithm tends to like it, and the more engagement you get. Because honestly, other than just saying, "Oh, this was a good take," people don't tend to engage in nuanced takes in the same way
Yeah.
as quickly into it or as much. And that's the thing. YouTube doesn't really care about what you make; it cares about how people engage with it.
Yes.
And if you make a bold declarative statement, you get a lot of engagement, be it from people going, yes, that's absolutely right, or people calling you an absolute idiot. It's all engagement. So I can't stop myself from being nuanced in most cases, but yet nuance is not good for growth. But it does foster, I think, a much healthier online community than playing up the anger. And that's not saying I never put out angry stuff. I put out angry stuff.
Oh, me too. Me too. There's some videos where I get super angry because but at the same time I'm like I know that if I don't get angry in a lot of videos, then maybe someone who doesn't agree with me will be more willing to listen. And whenever I get those comments from people who are like, I originally went into this video thinking that there's no way you would possibly have anything good to say about this, and then it turns out like you approached it from an interesting angle, and now I'm thinking a little bit more about it. I'm like, that's exactly why I'm here on the internet. And that's so I feel like it's more worthwhile. I encourage you to keep doing it. As you
And
have been. You've actually been on YouTube for a while now.
I have, and I don't know how to do it any other way at this point. So,
Mhm. Well, I'm glad that you're keeping it up because your channel is one of my favorites. So
aw,
I'm
thank
very
you.
glad we get to have this discussion today. You also just released a new book called Dreams of Fire, and I want to hear more about this book. I'm planning to read it and review it on my channel in the future. I haven't had time to read new things other than books I had to do for scheduled videos, but I'm like, I need to read some fiction. I've read like exclusively nonfiction for almost this whole year. I'm like, I need to read some fiction and have some fun. But tell us about Dreams of Fire, what the book is about, and just kind of an overview.
So, God, it's so hard to give a punchy description for this, and I end up spending more time saying what it isn't. So, it well, you'll see why in a second. It's a fantasy novel, and it is set in a completely original world. So it's not set in any pre-existing time. It's not urban fantasy or anything like that. It is a fantasy world in which humans have basically sort of a electropunk style technology, which as far as how far the technology has gotten, similar to steampunk, but it's operating on different means. But there is also within the world a lot of very primal magical forces which don't gel well with humanity as a rule. And there are people who are kind of caught in the middle of that, and they're known as elementals. And they are humans who, usually in their late teens to early 20s, begin to exhibit very raw, magical, primal, elemental energy. So, in the case of Dreams of Fire, the lead character is Ferris, who is a fire elemental. And what that means from a practical standpoint is fiery energies build up within him over time. They are going to have to be let loose at some point, and he has very little control over that. He cannot stop them from building up. He cannot hold them inside forever. He can't really do much more than point them when he releases these energies. And elementals, as a result, are feared, are often hunted and collected and studied by an organization called the Science Guild. And the plot follows Ferris basically on the run and trying to ensure his own freedom. And the main thing, so when I said I tend to have to talk about what the book isn't, this is not an epic story. By design, it is not. My remit going into this was a small story in a big world. I wanted to create a world that felt lived in and felt large and expansive, but tell a very small personal story about characters who would not ever be written about if someone were to write like the history textbook of this world. Nobody would ever talk about these people, but that doesn't mean they don't have stories worth telling. And that was sort of how I approached this. So if your appeal to fantasy is big epic quests and fighting the dark rising darkness and the chosen one, like I have literally none of that. But for something that is more personal, that is smaller scale, but still lives in that world, in those sort of larger fantasy worlds. That's Dreams of Fire.
That's really cool. And I like that you mentioned that it's not an epic because I think a lot of times in when we see a book that's set in a fantasy world or a science fiction world or something, we get that chosen one story a lot, or we get the this is going to be the person to defeat the evil and save the universe and whatever. But you know, like you said, the all the surrounding characters, all the other people within that universe have interesting stories too. And it's like you went and built this entire universe. What about all of those people? Their stories have to be fascinating too because you made a cool ass universe. Like I think that's really cool that you're focusing on a more like small scale story rather than like the fate of the universe rests in his hands kind of thing.
I mean, and like personally, I often find stories, especially like the first time you're reading something in a fantasy setting that go that big in scale, I find it kind of distancing
Yeah.
because like, well, I don't really have a proper concept of what it means to threaten the world. This is like, even if you set something in the real world and do that, that's a very nebulous concept.
Yeah.
I would much rather get invested in the core and like there can be save the world stories where they do get you invested in the core characters and it still works. Something like Lord of the Rings is a solid example of that. But for me, I feel like going too large in scale makes it harder to do that. And I feel like if you've made an interesting world, you don't have to threaten it with destruction to tell an interesting story within it.
Yeah, I completely agree. So this book sounds super cool, and also I'll pop up graphics on the screen, but it has a really cool cover. So I kind of want to hear a little bit about your publication process for this. I know you went the self-publishing route, which I have so much respect for because I have self-published 9 out of my 10 books that are out. So I love that whole process. So can you tell me a little bit about was this your first experience in the self-publishing process, and what was that like for you?
So this isn't my first self-published work. It's actually my third.
Okay.
This is, however, my first novel.
Oh, cool.
So the first piece that I self-published, which was I think 3 years ago now, it was called Skirting Gender. And that was much more about my own life experience as a gender fluid person. And like the reason all three of these are, well, the reason this and Dreams of Fire are self-published is because I did shop it around publishers, didn't get bites, got impatient, went screw it, I'll do it myself. That was the decision to self-publish in both cases. So when I did Skirting Gender, I had gone through the process and sort of hit a lot of the initial stumbling blocks. You know, my first time working with an editor, figuring out how to get stuff up on Amazon, how to get it up through Ingram so it would be available in bookstores and libraries, and navigating all of that myself. So I had been through that before. The other thing that I self-published in between, which really I did with very little push, just because oh God, I need to not spend too much time on this one because it's a weird anomaly. So I wrote a play.
Oh, cool. I love
Um,
that.
I wrote a play that's called When She Wakes, a BDSM exploration in 2 acts.
I love it.
And while I do have some ties to community theater and local theater groups in Vermont, I didn't know anyone who was I found some stage venues that might have been willing to let it be put on. I couldn't find any troupes or actors who were comfortable actually doing it, just because of the material. And I don't think it's unperformable, but it does ask a lot of the participants. So eventually I simply published it on Amazon, basically as a way to be like, look, if anyone ever stumbles across this and wants to put it on, here's where you can find it. And that was more just so it was out in the world and out of my head. Now this one, Dreams of Fire, I have been thinking about to varying degrees for about 20 years. Because the very first ideas that sort of this would sprout out of came to me when I was in college and was lying in bed and couldn't sleep. And so from like these initial things, all of this eventually happened. And again, the decision to self-publish was more about, I did shop it around a little bit, got either never heard back at all or got, the polite rejections, and eventually said, I can either keep shopping this around for a year or I can self-publish it myself and just be done with it, which is what I opted to do. That said, it had its own little weird hiccups that Skirting Gender certainly didn't. The big one being, and I wish I could remember why this idea came into my head, but somewhere in the process, I had the idea of having it have illustrations. So that idea, once I had it, would not leave my brain. And so when I ran a Kickstarter for it, because I ran a Kickstarter for Skirting Gender as well, and that was mostly to be able to afford an editor. For this one, it was mostly to be able to afford to pay the illustrators. And so when that went successful, I made so much more work for myself to get all of the stuff that I needed from my illustrators to commission the cover, which is gorgeous. I do love that cover. I
love the cover. It's beautiful.
And to commission a world map and a town map. So, because honestly, if you're going to do a fantasy world, I feel like you really need a world map.
Gotta have the map. Everyone wants the map. Yep.
And all these things, and figuring out how to format with the illustrations and have it look worth a darn. And it's been, I wasn't completely unprepared because of what I went through self-publishing Skirting Gender, but there was definitely a lot more moving parts to this one this time around.
I definitely want to read Skirting Gender too. That sounds really interesting, especially because I've been on a nonfiction kick for this whole year, basically. Yeah, I mean, and everyone who's on my channel pretty much knows how much I love using crowdfunding as a way to launch a book, since I used that to launch the entire Forever Home Friends business. I have the longest chapter in Savvy Business Owners, my chapter of crowdfunding tips, because I think Kickstarter and sites like that provide such an amazing opportunity. What was your experience like using crowdfunding and running this book on Kickstarter, and did you take pre-orders? What was the whole experience like?
I did. So like when I do the backbone of the perks for both Skirting Gender and this was basically to effectively pre-order a copy of the book. And then, higher tiers, it would be signed, or when I did Skirting Gender, like you would also get like a signed sort of vanity photo of me.
Oh, cool.
And with Dreams of Fire, there were things like you can get, a signed poster-sized copy of the world map. And I had to have a cutoff number for this, but I did have a tier where you can name an incidental character who.
Oh, that's fun.
Not a major character, but who is going to appear, get named, and do a thing. And before I did that, I did have to go through the book. Like, how many of these can I actually do? Because I'm not going to write new characters to have these names in,
right.
But like, I've got a bunch of like one scene characters who like do one thing.
Yeah.
And so that was the high end tier on that. Now, when it comes to like how well because in both cases the Kickstarters were successful, but honestly, I think I owe more of that to my existing online footprint.
Yeah.
More than anything else. Because in both cases, I promoted the launch of the Kickstarter through YouTube and Twitter and was basically able to, and that's not to say 100% of the backers came from that, but like, I have no doubt that the vast majority of the money in both cases came from people who already knew my work and basically just needed to be made aware of this new thing I was doing that they could help me do. And we had kind of talked off mic a little bit because I had mentioned I'm not great at self-promotion. I don't like doing it. So I have the benefit of a pre-existing, God, it feels weird to call it a fan base, but I don't know what else to.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely do. I feel like it was fun. I was a fan of you before I got to know you, which is cool. It's really cool online when you get to know somebody that you were a fan of and you get to become like a friend as opposed to having a separation. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it definitely is. But there were still people who found it. It's one of the reasons that I stuck with Kickstart. Well, the other thing was they allowed their workers to unionize, which I had put on hold launching a Kickstarter while that was going on. I'm like,
Oh,
I don't know if I'm comfortable using them, but
hmm.
I didn't want to use Indiegogo.
Yeah.
Um, but they did eventually resolve that. I'm like, okay, I'm comfortable using this. And there were some people who backed the book who just found it like
Yeah.
through Kickstarter, which is one of the reasons I tend to recommend it. Is that there are people who just look through categories of stuff looking for interesting things to back, and
I'm
that
one of those
doesn't.
people. I do that all the time.
I used to be, but I can't afford to be anymore.
Yeah.
But that doesn't really happen on sites like Indiegogo. Nobody sort of scrolls through looking for stuff to fund there. So that you have to direct almost all the traffic there yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you had a good Kickstarter experience, and I'm glad that you were able to get such a gorgeous cover and get the book illustrated and everything. When it came to finding an illustrator and finding an editor, how did you go about finding those services and finding the right person to make this book come to life?
Pretty much all of it through Twitter. To
Hmm.
varying degrees. So, like the interior art, actually, there's three illustrators. So the very first illustrator that I started working with, and I started working with long before I even like ran the Kickstarter, and I was just like I was commissioning like maybe one illustration a month because that was all I could afford. So this was a couple of years ago. Started working with her. I found her because she came onto my radar because she did a piece of fan art of me as a cat.
I love that.
So that was how she came onto my radar. And again, I don't remember why I had the notion to have it illustrated, but when I had the notion, I looked at her rates for half page illustrations, half page single panel illustrations, and I'm like, would you be up for illustrating my book? And for a while we worked back and forth. Eventually I ended up starting to work with other illustrators because she actually got her own book deal and couldn't commit the time
Mm.
to my stuff anymore. And so the other two I found, I said all from Twitter. One's from Instagram, who I had just known for a little while, who I'd actually commissioned to do a piece of art of me like a year or two before. And then the third one was one who I found off of Twitter, which was also how I found my editor and also the audiobook narrator, because that'll be released later this year.
Oh, that's exciting. Yay. Everybody stay tuned for the audiobook.
Yeah. And that was just kind of putting the call out and like not 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 committing myself to like I'm definitely going to pick from this pool, but putting the call out like, look, I am looking for this. If you are interested in helping, send me your rates and experience, and we'll see if there's somewhere to work. And that was how I found the editor that I'm working with, and I've had a wonderful time working with. They've been great, and the audio book editor, and as well as the cover art and the this is not something that'll be in the book, but one of the rewards stretch goals I ended up doing for the Kickstarter were character portraits on bookmarks,
Oh, that's cool.
and I got different illustrators to do those so that they were much more custom than the illustrations that were actually in the book. And all those illustrators I found through Twitter. The only other place I went was for the world map and the city map. I went to Fiverr,
Okay.
which I actually find to be a fantastic resource. That's where I've
Yeah.
gone to get my various merch designed. When I have stuff put on T-shirts or whatnot. Like I know what I want, but I'm also not a graphic designer, so
Yeah.
I've found Fiverr to be a very good resource. That's actually where I got my outro music from my videos
Oh, that's
was
cool.
commissioned through Fiverr.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. Well, that's cool. It seems like social media has been a really good place for you to connect and I guess network with other professionals for the type of work that you're creating.
It really has, especially with the artists, because like artists follow other artists and artists retweet other artists.
Yes.
So it's very easy to fall down a rabbit hole in a good way of like finding an artist whose style you like, who then does a retweet of another artist in a style you're like, ooh, I could work with that. And like suddenly you've got 15 tabs open and sort of comparing commission rates and floating email, DMs and saying, are you currently accepting commissions and things like that. And it snowballs very quickly, but in an exciting way, because it's very easy for those to just chain together because they all boost each other.
Yeah.
So once you find one, you'll start to find a whole bunch of others just connected through that.
I definitely feel like a lot of the creative communities out there are a lot more collaborative than competitive. And I really like that, the way that like every writing community I've been a part of has been all about, oh, you're an author, I'm an author. Let's promote each other's books. Let's share writing advice with each other. No one's ever seems to be like they're trying to, dominate an industry. I think because when you're in a book world or an art world, there's not really a limit. Like people who want to read books, they want to read a lot of books. So just because they read one book doesn't mean they're not going to read another. So it feels a lot more collaborative and mutually beneficial.
Yeah, I mean that's not to say. Usually, once some people get to a certain size of influence or size of audience, things can go off the rails. But yeah, as a broad statement in terms of definitely the majority of the community, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess talking a little bit about the story itself, I mean, your channel is all about like, fandom and nerd culture. You've got a lot of sci-fi and fantasy stuff that you talk about, and it seems like your book is incorporating a lot of those elements as well. So I'm wondering, where did a lot of the inspiration for this particular book come from?
Well, it came from a few places. I can tell you that, like, the way I envision the technology is very much inspired by my favorite video game of all time, which is Final Fantasy VI.
Hmm.
Um, and sort of that style of world and technology where, like, the setting feels a little bit sort of Victorian era kind of thing, but the technology is beyond that, even though that's sort of the general vibe of it. And so I sort of took at least the aesthetic of the technology that humans have achieved from that. When it came to the forests and what I call the wild world, where the Fae live, and the various Fae species that I have, the vast majority of those I just ended up scouring Celtic and some Scandinavian parts of the world folklore for things to incorporate and in some cases like modify a little for my own purposes. I have one original species in the book that doesn't and the only reason they are original is because there was no existing folklore creature that what I wanted to do with them was it was going to map on. I was going to have to change an existing creature so much that I'm like, I might as well just make this a new
Yeah.
thing. Because I did my best to try and be respectful of the folklore and the traditions around these creatures, but I do make some modifications and some of my own interpretations. But once it got so far away from the original, in this case of this one species, I'm like, this needs to be its own thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And actually, early on, I had thought that maybe I would have a whole bunch of other original species, but I didn't like any of the other ideas that I had. And so that was kind of what made me comfortable, like really going into the well of fantasy works. And the thing is, it's funny if you watch my videos. Well, honestly, if you watch the videos of anyone who talks about fictional works a lot, be it written or movies or television, you'll realize that pretty much everybody to some degree specializes based off their education or their interest. So you have someone like Lindsay Ellis who comes at things with a very, a very film school analytical
Yeah.
mind, but you've also got folks like Dan Olson of Folding Ideas who very much looks at things through the lens of editing. And
Yeah.
they'll talk about other stuff. For me, I pretty much always end up coming back to just the narrative structure of things. And if I'm ever going to criticize anything, whether it's a movie or television, I will almost always be criticizing the script, if not exclusively, probably 8 times more than I will ever criticize
Yeah.
visual effects or cinematography or the acting, because that's where I drill down, because so many things root from that. So it's one of the things that's kind of unnerving, is like I talk so much about badly structured stories, and then I'm putting up my own story and going, oh God, I hope I did not put on blinders writing my own story and just write something that I would have torn apart. I hope I didn't do that.
I feel that when I put out when I put out my business book, Savvy Business Owner, I'm like, this is my first like business self-help book. Like most of my channel is tearing apart shitty business and self-help books. I'm like, if someone hates this, I have it coming at this point. Like, so
Yeah.
that's a very real fear. I get it.
Yeah. So and it's funny. It's been a slow mesh, because I've been working on this book, as I said, to varying degrees for so dang long. So many various things and ideas and notions have been integrated or let go of over time. Like, there are multiple characters that have had gender swaps from
Mhm.
their original, how I originally thought of them to now. Like, there was one point where I thought I was going to have like an actual pantheon of gods that was like real and did stuff, and I scrapped that entire idea.
Mhm.
Um, and I had there's this whole thing that it's impossible for me to get into without spoilers, and actually in a way that would spoil more than just the book, because I don't even explain this on purpose.
Mhm.
But there's a story that I came up with, and that I actually used to tell my kid as a bedtime story, sort of a bedtime fairy tale. And I ended up integrating that, yeah, and the ideas in that as almost like an origin story for some of the stuff going on in this book. And it's working on it for so long, it almost kind of became a black hole
Yeah.
for any idea that I had that could fit.
Mhm.
Because like I've had other ideas for something like, well, that has no business being in that story. But if it could fit, I'm like, maybe I'll put that in too, which hopefully lends itself to feeling more lived in and fleshed out than it probably would otherwise if I had gotten to it any sooner than I had.
That's really cool. I feel like there's going to be so much cool stuff in this book. I'm really looking forward to reading it. I'm so excited that you put it out. For everyone who's watching this, I have linked the Amazon link and the Goodreads link in the description below. So please check it out. Is on Amazon. It's available in paperback and ebook, right?
It's
Yeah.
available in paperback and ebook, either illustrated or unillustrated editions. It's
Oh,
also
cool.
now available in hardcover, which
Nice.
is full color illustrations. And I apologize in advance for how expensive that is. I wish I could charge less for it, but full color printing is just a
It's
mofo.
so expensive. That's like
Yeah.
when I'm doing Forever Home Friends stuff. Like, I feel like half the time I spend on my business is trying to find cheaper ways to print full color. Full color printing is a lot. So,
Yeah.
yeah, but it looks really cool. So yeah, if someone out there wants some full color illustrations, then you can get them. So Amazon link is in the description below, guys. Goodreads link, add it to your to read list. Don't forget to leave a review and a star rating, because that's very helpful to authors. Thank you so much for doing this interview. It's really cool to get to interview someone I've admired on YouTube for a really long time and talk about your new work. So congratulations so much on the book release, and I hope everyone out there enjoys it and has a lot of fun reading it.
Thanks so much. I had a great time.